Welcome to Political Trade Secrets, an inside look at campaigns and politics, where we pull back the curtain, look under the hood, and investigate all aspects of politics and how elections are won. Now, here's your host, Dustin Olson.
And welcome to Political Trade Secrets. I'm Dustin Olson. I am grateful to have you joining us here across the internet. We're live streaming on 12 different platforms. If you're watching us on YouTube or on Facebook or on Twitter or wherever we're at, we're also cross-posting to all the different social media locations as well at this moment. And we really do appreciate you joining us for today. We're going to be talking about the Olson Strategies Theory of Communications for Catalyzing Actions, which is a great tool set to actually look at if your communications are working, not working. You can look at each of these areas to see what might be out and needs a little tune-up. So this is influenced by a number of things. We'll get into that in a moment. We call it the power of A.I.R, A.I.R, to help people remember that. But with that, I'd like to welcome my co-host, Sean Bartley, to the show, who is quickly doing his best to share our podcast and live stream to as many places as possible, because as we know, any given moment we are going to be, we get shut down by whatever platform, or the platform goes out of existence one day. Here in 2 months, we're going to have Periscope going out of business. So wherever you're watching us, thank you for being here. And we do want to encourage you to join the conversation, ask questions, leave your comments. If you, whatever platform you're on, post the questions, we'll be able to get them all here, and we'll be able to include you in the show. If you're watching on one of the podcasting platforms later in a replay, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or iHeartRadio, thank you for doing that. And if you want to leave a review and let us know what you like about the show, we really do appreciate that. So with that, Sean, how are you doing today?
Doing well. Good morning. Hope everybody had a great weekend. And I'm really looking forward to this topic today. I think it's going to be a great conversation and very helpful to everybody who's out there paying attention and listening. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Well, I agree completely. It is a great it's a great topic. It's really having your communications, how you're able to actually speak in such a way, communicate in such a way that people hear it, their understanding is actually shaped by it, and it sticks with them long enough that eventually, when they have to make a decision or they take an action, that it actually informs that action. And that's really the structure of what we're going to be talking about today. While I'm on the topic of having something that sticks with you such that you can make an action later, I would love for you to help us enshrine free speech, to protect free speech by joining us at politicaltradesecrets.com. It's one of the things we can do to make sure that our voices are heard, that we're all able to freely assemble. So if you go to politicaltradesecrets.com, you can sign up to be a Political Trade Secrets Insider and get exclusive stuff from us. But also, in case they turn off one of these programs at any given point, which has happened in the last few weeks to us, we're able to communicate with people and ensure that we're actually able to assemble to talk about how to make a difference in politics, because that's ultimately what we're all here for. We hope to empower you as an everyday citizen of this country to be able to be the political leader that your community, your state, and our country needs at this time, and ultimately to help us with reigniting American patriotism, because that is what will bind us all together as Americans and is what's going to be our strength going forward. So with that, please go to politicaltradesecrets.com, sign up to be a Political Trade Secrets Insider, and that way we can all work together to really have this country be the greatest country in the world as it is today. So with that, Sean, would you like to tell people about our sponsors before we get into our theory of communications on how to catalyze actions?
Absolutely. Look, if this, as you're looking at this topic, you say, hey, this is interesting, I'd like to really dive deep into this subject and really be able to have every conversation have the kind of power we're going to be talking about today. Well, reach out to us. We'd love to work with you on your campaign, or talk to you about what it takes to run for office, or how you can be a powerful political leader in your community and how we can work with you to do that. It's olsonstrategies.com, OLSON strategies.com. You can email me, Sean, SEAN at olsonstrategies.com, or Dustin at olsonstrategies.com. And we'd love to set up that conversation with you today. We're also proud to be sponsored by Grassfire. What does Grassfire do? It's really all of the one-on-one communications that a campaign needs to do. Look, you get one shot to get on the ballot. The timelines are tight. How are you making sure that it's done properly, done well, and following all the rules? Every municipality even has different rules on what it takes to get onto the ballot. So make sure you're doing it properly, doing it well. Call the experts at Grassfire. They will deliver for you. They do canvassing, petitioning, live calling. So reach out to them today, and put your best foot forward from the beginning of your campaign or your issue campaign. It's Grassfire. Grassfire also fuels 10centtexting.com. Look, 82% of people open every text they get. Opening it is not what people need help with. What they need help with is actually retaining what is going to be possible. So look, 10 cent texting, these folks, Grassfire, they really use the tools that we're going to be talking about today to help you craft a message that'll make the difference. They really put a keen eye on it. So they literally wrote the book on powerful political texting. It's there on their site. So go download it and figure out how to put an image, a GIF, or a short video right there in your text message that can deliver results for you. That's 10centtexting.com. Dustin?
That's excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I'm sharing on all the different platforms as you're speaking. So if it looks like I may be a little bit distracted, that's what we're doing. And we would really appreciate if you're willing to share on whatever social media, whatever platform you're watching right now. If you're willing to share the show, that is what's going to make a difference. And in making sure that folks out there in the world actually who are citizens of this country and want to make a difference in their community. They really would like to bring us back to those traditional founding principles, that they would like to have us all come together as Americans, that they have the tools and the support and the coaching that they need to be able to make that kind of difference. Because whether you are in your community, you see some issue that you need to take on. Maybe it's a ballot initiative. Maybe it's simply speaking up on an issue, or really you just want to have the influence within your sphere of influence, actually impact the folks around you, that you know that you can have that impact with them. We want to be able to be there. Or if you want to run for office, we want to be the ones who empower you to be able to take on whatever your vision is and actually go about making it a reality. Because that really is the essence of political power, is to have whatever you intend to happen actually happen. However you say it goes is how it goes. That is the essence of power. So with that, we're going to be talking today about what we call the power of A.I.R. And I'm going to type up some stuff that we can actually show you what we mean by that. The power of A.I.R, and that stands for attention, intention, and retention. And I want to just let people know that this is something that we have for our company. And but at the end of the day, it's been influenced by a number of folks who have great thinkers on various topics, which are fairly eclectic in this. So I would say the first one that I'd like to mention is Carmen Simon, who wrote this excellent book called Impossible to Ignore, which is really the retention portion of it. The fact is, if you can't remember something, it's not going to have as much of an effect on your decisions or your actions. So we'll be talking about that. And then another person, Scott Adams. I've mentioned Scott Adams a couple of times before. I think he's a great new voice on the scene in the last 4 or 5 years. And this is his book, Win Bigly, Persuasion in the World Where Facts Don't Matter. He's talked a lot about the attention portion of our theory of communications. And then surprisingly enough, the person who kind of pulls it all together, and I would give the most credit to is Deepak Chopra. Seriously, is he's talked for a long time about attention and intention, and really how attention is what focuses you, and then intention is what shapes the perception. So that is the whole thing. So it's attention, which is the first part of it, intention, which is the second part of it, and then retention, which is the third part of it. And we will be talking about that throughout this show. And to just give you kind of the big point of all of it, so attention, that's really 100% of communication. This is an overstatement, but 100% of communication starts with attention. If you don't have someone's attention, there is no communication happening. It's impossible to communicate if you have not gotten somebody's attention. The next part is the intention. We're going to talk about this more in a little bit, but inside of that is the idea that context is decisive. I'd also say that Werner Erhard also had an impact on these thoughts, and then and really that's the idea that how you intend people to take your communication will shape how they see it. And then the last one, retention, which is you can only take action on what you can think to do. Whatever you can remember, that's the only thing you can actually take action on. So those are the overarching ideas. And Sean, as we set up this conversation, anything that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think as you're listening, it probably sounds pretty simplistic, like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But the difficult part is, how do you actually have all three of these happen?
Mm-hmm.
Because really, if any of them are missing, what you intend to communicate is going to be lost.
Yep.
So really being clear on that, and it takes something to really deliver on all three. Mm-hmm. And I know that's what we're going to be talking about today, but I think that is something that people tend to get there, and I'm struck by the seeming desire of the new administration here, mm-hmm. to probably try to avoid attention as much as possible. And you're going to find out that sometimes that's what some people will be doing out there.
Mm-hmm.
So
it might make sense in some cases to not have attention, because that will you might shape people's opinions, their perspective, their thoughts in the direction that you don't really want to. And that's not what you would want. And it might stick with people. Frankly, communication's always happening. People are always being impacted. It's one of those things that we talk about. Every single person's always being brainwashed, is how we say it, and or being influenced would be another way to say that, or being persuaded, but really being influenced. And sometimes a lack of communication is also going to have that impact as well. Because clearly, if you aren't getting people's attention on something, then even if it's something they really do need to know, this is how most of the fake news actually works, is they disappear the information. They actually push it out of your existence, because if you're not seeing it or hearing it, it really doesn't exist for you. So you can't have the experience of that information. So
and I think what we saw in this election from big tech in particular, mm-hmm. Were great examples of error.
Yeah,
not examples we necessarily liked, but they were great examples of it. I think about the Uber Eats or these other apps, offering rides to being able to vote. Well, they really had it all. They had what they intended. The intention was there, and you didn't have to retain it for long, by the way.
Yep.
It was on the phone, and if you didn't retain it once, you got another reminder. So,
and people are gonna. So if you have questions already, I'm guessing people have questions. Feel free to drop those in, and we will address that. I would expect that people have thoughts about this. So it looks like we have folks already joining us. Have a couple of good mornings. So thank you for that. Women Reigniting American Patriotism. And Alexandria, good morning, guys. It definitely sounds like today's topic is going to make us stronger political leaders. Well, I hope so. That's our that's what we hope to accomplish. Busy live today. Yep, we're doing a lot today. Thank you, Robert, for the comment, and thank you for the shares. I see people are, and this is interesting. So this is a question to another one of the viewers. And Robert asked, replying to Alexandria Knox, how is redistricting done in New Hampshire? And it might be a redistricting and reapportionment question. And it looks like we already have an answer. So I love this, that folks watching are communicating with each other. Awesome question. I would love to have this conversation with you. Feel free to send me a message. Well, wonderful. We're connecting people. That's great.
Yeah.
So this is so we're going to go straight to the first leg of this, and before we do that, I'm just going to further set it up. So communication really only matters if it moves people to act, or more importantly, whether it's now or possibly in the future, because a lot of times the action that needs to be taken isn't going to happen right now, so it has to stick with them for some time. And it's really only effective if that action or decision is in the direction that you intended. There's oftentimes we communicate things and it has unintended consequences. And then finally, and ultimately, none of this is possible if you've never held anybody's attention. So that's the first part. The power of A.I.R is that attention, 100% of communication starts with attention. And there's a number of, this is actually, interestingly, in the book Impossible to Ignore, it specifically has, so this is part of the retention and having, and actually focus and getting people's attention. If you have typos in something, it will have people stop and they're more likely to remember it. So you're more likely to get someone's attention and they're more likely to stop and do that. So, of course, I intended for that to happen because of the topic today.
Well done. Well done.
If you want to believe it. But that's part of what we're talking about today. So let's go into this. Sean, any of your thoughts as to some of the people who are the best at gathering or getting people's attention so that they can actually have the conversation?
Yeah, well, I think there are great examples over time. I mean, we've talked about how the President Trump is really great about getting people's attention, and we made the case that he was intentional about it.
Yep.
Tweets at 4 a.m. Were more impactful than tweets at noon. And why is that? Well, because most of the news is generated on the East Coast and then moves its way out. 1, 2 is the editorial boards don't start until the news meetings and
the editorial meetings
don't happen until they happen in the morning, but they happen after it. But if you can set the tone for the day, that's what the president did. And that's why we argued that
former President Trump.
Yes.
So I'm not so sure that this is a skill set that Biden has.
Yeah, and I don't know that he wants it. I mean, I think that's one of the things that we're learning.
However, former President Obama, I think, got this. He also got the ability to disappear things. I think it was actually one of his bigger skills that he had. And look at that, magically it shifts and it's now correct. Well,
and I think
then I think of former President Bush, and he was absolutely terrible at this. He could not keep people's attention, at least in the right way. I work for the guy, and I think a lot of him, but he's pretty terrible at this. Part of the communications, and these really are levels. You have to have the attention first. Like that's why we say 100% of communication starts with attention. There's no communication happening unless you do that. And I think George W. Bush was particularly bad at this. I think Bill Clinton was decent at it. George H.W. Bush, not great. and Reagan was excellent at it. So it gives you a good sense of better communicators are going to be the people who get your attention.
Well, and I think this gets to a great point, right? I don't know how many times have you heard or said yourself, I wish I knew about that, or I wish I heard about that. And it's quite likely that something happened that where you could have easily known that this was going on. They just failed to get your attention.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever it is. I mean, it can happen in any number of ways. And so really being able to get one's attention is so critical. And, so I think the president did a good job of that. I think about
President Trump did a good job of that.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Anyway, when I'm referring to the current occupant, I'll probably just say Biden. But
there you go. That's perfectly fine. But just to make it clear that so this is by far the skill set that Trump brought in. He understood this. He understood this very clearly. He even would talk about it almost as like a commentator talking about himself. He would say, if I wasn't interesting, you people wouldn't cover me. He'd say that to the media. And he realized for a Republican in particular, you just had to be able to cut through. It's why he might do 30 tweets in a day, and the only ones anybody cared about were the ones that were interesting. And that usually, there's certain things that make something interesting. If it's a little bit off, if it's a little bit wrong, if it's a little bit scandalous, if there's a little bit of drama. It's why he didn't mind all the drama stories around the White House and the intrigue and what have you, because you can use that attention as a sort of Trojan horse to get your message through. And also, even if you have people talking about an issue and they might even be opposing you on the issue, if you have them talking about the issue, you have decided the battlefield. This goes back to Sun Tzu, who also influences this, that he who chooses the battlefield is likely to be the victor. And that is also what's going on in this conversation, is when you have someone's attention, you are choosing the battlefield. Now, you can also be, like Dukakis. And Dukakis did the number one advanced fail. I think most advanced people consider it the number one advanced fail is having Dukakis on the tank with his oversized helmet on, looking like Snoopy on his doghouse, pretending to be the Red Baron, and it just looks so stupid. He got a lot of attention for that, and it went exactly against, which is going to be the next thing that we talk about. It went against, actually made people think of his biggest weakness, which was strength in the military, etc.
Well, on the attention side of things, I wanted to talk about one thing that the media is really good at getting your attention. So
and they don't even have to even be that good at it. They have your attention.
Yeah.
They own it. It's almost a monopoly. They've got your attention.
But what they do is really try to hold you.
Mm-hmm.
And so the tease is one way to have your attention. Like, oh, I'd really like to see that. And,
especially through the break, right? So they, at the very end, or even they'll have you through a few breaks, they're going to have whoever they think their biggest guest is, or the most juicy topic they're going to cover in like an hour-long program. They're going to tease that multiple times, and they know if they can keep you through the break. That's the big thing. And they actually track this. Nielsen tracks this to see who are the people who keep people through the break. It used to be, it's not this way anymore, but it used to be Frank Luntz was one of the top people who kept people through the commercial breaks, because people used to be polling and been able to do some of these the different like interview sections with him would be the things that were kind of like crack for people. They really loved listening to that stuff, and so they would stick through to listen to Frank Luntz. He used to be, I don't think that's the case anymore, but about 10 years ago, you could actually see that he kept people through the break better than most guests.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And I think, and you actually noticed it in how they set up the show, right? Mm-hmm. They'd have them at the beginning or near the beginning, and then they'd say, and we're going to come back to Frank and his panel. Mm-hmm. And you were like, oh, I'd kind of like to see what the second part of this is. So then they, get you through a few segments, and then they'd be back to them, and it's kind of the way they set that up. And so that's something to be looking for when you're out there, like, oh, hey. And then, of course, commercials have to get your attention very quickly and keep you and get the intention. And, they've got 30 seconds to do it. And you can achieve all this in 30 seconds. That is the thing about it, right? And they'll do it with jingles, right, on retention. We'll get to that in a few. Spoiler alert, but it's coming up. And then, but you're probably thinking, like, what can I do as a candidate or a political leader to get attention? And so I think one thing is what you're talking about interesting? Like, to people who aren't you, or people who are really into that topic? And it's a question we get to ask ourselves every day.
Exactly. We can always tell. Not always tell. Sometimes we're affected by algorithms and whatnot. But yes, that is something that we are very well aware of. And when we talk about each of these, so if you have communication that's working or not working, it's really worthwhile to look at this as 3 different areas where, if your communication's not having the impact that you want to have, you just look at these 3 areas: attention, intention, and retention, and look at them and see which one of them might be out. Like, you're looking at a machine, which one of these may not be working the way that you want it to work, and then you go to work on that. And if you can kind of bring these all up to a high level of performance in your communication, then you're going to do well. Some people do this almost to the point, they've been doing it so long that they almost do it as second nature. That's what I would say Donald Trump was, but he was also very intentional about it. You could tell that he would word things a certain way. He also, honestly, I personally think sometimes he would misspell things, because it's so well known in the cognitive sciences that when you have a misspelling or things like that, people do focus on it. It is like really high level communications tools. I think it's a little bit of a gimmick to do that to people, but it is something that will have people stop and they will focus, and you have that attention, and you're going to have a greater impact on them. So that's the first part. And I encourage people to let us know what communicators, whether it's politics, entertainment, or wherever else, do you see that they just happen to just like get the attention of people? Like, the camera loves them. They're able to completely command focus and are able to drive the conversation because they can actually get your attention. And where are people that you think these people are really smart? They really have things that were great to say, but they weren't able to capture my attention. And how did that impact them? I think of Mitt Romney was one of those people who was not really able to hold people's attention. And if you're a Republican, there's a couple things you have against you. One, you're probably a little bit more boring because you're more of a bean counter type, and a little bit less maybe flamboyant out there. So you have all that going against you. And then the media is not all that interested in talking to you about your ideas. So that's going to be a little bit of a challenge. And we can bellyache about that all day long, but that doesn't really help. We just have to get that you might have to step up your game, much like Trump had to in the last 5 years. And that's not always going to win the day.
Well, one thing I will say, I think the media's kind of gotten out of the ideas business altogether. And now they just want to, basically they want to talk about horse races and other stuff like that, and, parlor intrigue and stuff like that. So it is going to take something to cut through. And I do think that is something that is going to make a difference for you, though. I do think Kanye has done a good job of being able to.
Kanye is a great example of this,
and because he's able to get attention on a myriad of different subjects, and I do think that is a gift. I think there are some people who can get attention in a certain area because they might be experts in that or whatever. They've kind of got a little gravitas around that, but I think
when he speaks, people listen.
Mm-hmm.
And even if they diminish him, and there's a lot of people who, oh, that's Kanye, but it doesn't matter. He's already gotten into your head and he's having an impact. And you're thinking about what he wants you to think about. He has the ability, if it's used correctly, to really have a great impact on the country. We talk about AOC. We do not like her. I think she's bad news, et cetera, et cetera. And yet she gets this so right
Mm-hmm.
that she has people thinking of her. The fact that we're talking about her right now, the fact that anybody knows who she is when she's now only in her second term in Congress. And we have all these people who say, we talk to members of Congress, we talk to people who are running, people who say, oh, it's not your turn, blah, blah, blah. All the typical status quo types. They think that you have to go and earn your stripes and you have to work your way through Congress. And while that's great, and I wish that was the case, it's not how it is. If you go and you get people's attention, you're going to run the place. And AOC pretty much leads Nancy Pelosi around by her nose. You can see it in the stuff that they talk about and the things that the media is talking about. AOC is setting the agenda, whether you like it or not. She gets people's attention, and she gets this first one extremely right.
Absolutely. I think they're great. They're great examples of really looking at that. And so you can see it really everywhere in life. I would encourage you to do that. And think about, like, if you're talking about something, think about what will make it more interesting to those who need to cover it. And that's the other thing, is that you do have to get, most of the time, especially if you're trying to go through the mainstream news venues, you are going to have what is going to get the attention of a editor or someone who is the news assignment person. So what is going to get their attention? So it could be visuals, which we talked about in the Cicero example. It could be, stuff like that.
Talk about emotion in the Cicero one, and that's a big part of it. If you can, as he says, communication is emotions. I paraphrase that, but that is, influence is evoking people's emotions.
Yeah, and
it keeps people attuned to what you're saying. That's why a drama is what it is. That's why the story format, also the story brand method that we talked about before, that's really powerful, because people are going to be more likely to stay through something if it follows that typical story format.
Yeah. So I think the question here is, where do you want to direct the conversation? And that's where you want to direct the attention.
Yeah, so you can move it all over the place. We're going to have, we'll see. I'm not quite, it's scheduled on the books, and we'll see if it will make sense. But we're supposed to have one of the former bachelors. People may know we worked on a television show, and Ben Higgins, who is a friend of ours, is interested in politics, and we want to talk to him about that. But one of the things, whether people like it or not, a little bit of celebrity gets people's attention. People are more likely to pay attention. And one of the things we've found is that he's able to get attention because of being the most popular bachelor they've ever had. He's able to get people's attention, and so he's able to have more influence over things. It just is what it is. And the point of this is, you don't have to necessarily do it exactly like AOC. You don't have to do it exactly like Donald Trump. You don't have to do it exactly like the news media, which pretty much just control the medium that you see. There's a whole lot of different ways that you can garner people's attention. So with that, I don't know if I see any questions for anybody. Well, here we go. It is really important for us that are planning to run for office to begin to decide how to share our stories so that people just aren't hearing boring facts. They want to know us as people. It's a really great point. And Sean, any thoughts that you have on that?
Yeah, I think that is to really get that voters want to have some sort of connection with you, and really, though, they want to know how it connects to their life. And people said, "Oh, how could working class voters in a place like Ohio here have a connection with Donald Trump. Don't they get that he's just some, liberal and all this other stuff? But what I know, speaking to a lot of folks around here, what they really appreciated about President Trump was is his, he is going to fight and fight and fight, and he's not, he's not going to take anybody's crap, and people around here feel like, hey, you know what? We've taken the world's crap for a while. We've taken, and I've said it before, right? Really, Middle America was asked to stop commerce in March of last year, so that a couple of urban centers could get well. I mean, that's really the view that we had of it, and people are like, "Wait a minute, this is crazy. This is craziness." And so I think people are like, you know what? That is the connection they have, and so, and the president President Trump did a great job of making it clear, like, when they attack me, they're attacking you, and people saw that, and they were like, yeah, that's right, because it started with Hillary, saying out loud what wasn't supposed to be said out loud, and
what half of the country or what Middle America thought people like her think of them and us. Like, we just assume that this is what they say. They just don't say it out loud. And she went ahead and said it out loud.
Yeah. And so people are like, oh, okay, well then that's how they really feel about us. They think we're deplorable, and somebody's going to fight against it. Well, I'm all for it then, And so yeah, that was kind of the so I think that when you're looking to connect with people, they don't have to have you don't have to have a similar story to them. You really need to be able to connect where they are and tie it into who you are.
Yeah, and putting on the show a little bit is important to, when I say put on a show, like have a little razzle dazzle, thinking about things in that way. There's nothing wrong with it. There's a lot of people who poo-poo that, and they're the people who don't have that much influence about things. And you want to have a little bit of like, okay, this is going to be a show. We're going to have some interesting things here. And you don't have to say it's a show, but, put it on, have some interesting hook to it. Otherwise, it's just not going to be impactful. And we have the comment, Jeb was boring. Yes, Jeb was very boring. And Donald Trump was able to garner people's attention on the only thing that really mattered, when he said low energy Jeb. And after that, you could not see it anymore. You could not help but see that Jeb was low energy, and it didn't matter what he did, even if he tried to be high energy. Like, I think he started taking people on hikes. I don't know. It just all was pathetic, honestly, that he was trying hard at that point. So it was being able to have people focus their attention on the thing that you wanted to. Trump was able to do that to Jeb. Then this is a really good question. So didn't AOC hurt her credibility with the way she got attention? And from the other side, you might say, someone might ask the question, didn't Donald Trump hurt his credibility with the way he got attention? So this is probably the biggest thing that anybody's going to have to deal with in this realm, is you're going to have a balancing act, because we're going to go into the intention leg of this stool in a second, and there's going to be a bit of an impact. I think the people who are the most effective are going to be okay with a little bit of the blowback. You're a boxer getting in the ring, you're going to take a couple punches. Like, you're going to get punched in the face. If you're willing to get in the ring, you are going to take a few punches. Now, not actually physically, unless you're Rand Paul, you're probably not going to take physical punches, but in reality, you're gonna be in the ring, and you're gonna have people attack you. Like, we have people, just by being out here, we have people who attack us. That's just something we have to deal with if you want to be out there and have influence. And by far the biggest kind of dynamic that's going to have an impact on you in this whole conversation on getting attention is this fear that people have of sticking their head up. The number one fear that people have is public speaking. Second is death. So the whole eulogy at a funeral is probably the person who's the most concerned about the whole thing is the one who's giving the eulogy. Well, the reason that is people fear judgment. They have a desire to look good and avoid looking bad. And most things that you see people do and the decisions they make, it will rationally follow those two dynamics.
Yep.
It will follow avoiding looking bad and trying to look good. That's how most people are going to navigate things. So when you're talking about attention, that's why most people avoid this. It's why they poo-poo people who might get people's attention. It's why the people that we're even talking about right now are the people who a lot of people attack them, because they have for themselves decided, I'm in the ring, I'm going to get attacked, and I'm just going to not care about that dynamic of trying to look good and avoiding looking bad. And I'm going to get the communication, I'm going to have to get people's attention, and that's going to cause people to judge me. But the truth is, people are judging you anyway, so you might as well do something with it. So that is the attention one. I'm going to finish with something I wrote about it to bring it to a finer point. No communication is possible except through your audience's senses, when they grant you, which they grant with their attention. And once you have their attention, what they think about naturally becomes more important to them than what they're not thinking about, regardless of their opinion. We have the power to focus and direct the energy of the conversation. So with this, the question I would leave people with your leadership as a political leader is, where do you want to direct the national political conversation and electoral politics? So that is where you want to garner attention towards, whatever that is. So with that, we're going to move into intention. And I'll bring that up. So intention, context is decisive. Does your communication shape the audience's perception and experience? So when we talk about intention here, we're talking about where you intend to take people. And we talk about context. Context is our term that we use that has almost everything that shapes people's experience we put into context. We talk about framing, that's part of context. We talk about filters, that's context. So all these terms that we use about how we all kind of experience the world, we put it into context. And we have a saying that context is decisive, because whatever your context is going to give you your actions and what you're saying and what you're thinking. So context is going to basically shape all of that. It's going to filter your reality. And if you've gotten people's attention, you're like, look over here, shiny object, let's talk about this, and you've gotten them thinking about that. Well, one, you've already started to shape their thinking towards whatever you say is important. And then it's about the filter that you start giving them. You're handing them over a filter, a lens that you want them to see the world through. So that's the next thing, is the intention. Now, this is the thing that it would be legitimate to ask the question: does an AOC, does a Donald Trump or others do they effectively do that part? Sometimes in the getting the attention, you might affect that intention portion of it, and that's a legitimate and valid concern, and you're going to have to walk that balancing act. But it's okay. There's going to be people that aren't on your team that you're really not trying to persuade anyway, and they're going to take the worst case possible view of what you say. They're going to take it all out of context. They're going to hear whatever they want to say, whatever they want to think out of it, and that's just how it's going to go. They're going to mishear you when you communicate. There's going to be people like that no matter what. And I would say, for instance, with the AOC example in getting attention, the truth is she's not trying to communicate to most of us in this audience. She's trying to communicate to her base and build a power base that way. And it actually benefits her when we hear her the wrong way, or we are offended by it, and then we start talking about her. We just elevate her energy and importance and ability to do things. It goes to the old idea of you can't hear one hand clapping, and she ensures that another hand shows up to complete the clap, if that makes sense. So Sean, what are some of your thoughts on this, on the intention portion?
I think this is where really getting to know who your audience is critical.
Yep.
So, like, President Trump knows that his audience isn't Chuck Todd,
Mm-hmm.
okay? Or any of these, Sunday show host or whatever. So when they criticize him for whatever, and they say it however they say it, it's getting shared out there where people go, huh, if you're watching it and you are in President Trump's target audience, they go, oh, well, I think that kind of makes sense. Like, I think it even started, I think about the trip down the escalator. And first off, one of the things is when you've got the attention, vividly sharing it, right? I mean, everything about that was memorable. It was lined up. He, descends down the golden escalator. It was memorable from all your senses right at the beginning.
Yeah.
And then he, of course, made sure he said something memorable in the announcement.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to build a wall. We're going to stop, rapists and criminals. And how it landed was, for people out here who were like, yeah, we never talk about illegal immigration, and I'd kind of like to have less rapists and criminals in the country. So that's how it landed for people. And then when the media says, isn't that terrible, what he said, it amplified it. And so the intention of getting that out to the people who needed to hear it kept going. The intention was, we're going to restore law and order. And that's what was heard over and over and over again. And even through voices that were not agreeing with him. And so that's something to remember, that he really got to create the context around that.
Yep.
Because another possible way it could have gone if he had said things a little differently was, well, who disagrees with less rapists and criminals on the street? And everybody could have agreed, and nothing would have been done about it, and would have moved on. So, but he framed it in such a way that people had to talk about it, and you had a choice. Like, we were either, we were either going to be politically correct about doing it, and it wasn't going to happen, or we were going to, ruffle some feathers and make these things happen. And so,
yeah, this is a really great example of, he wasn't concerned about how the media was going to take it wrong and take it out of context, but he got that, they're going to make him look bad. And I think he really gets this all the way through. Sometimes it maybe wasn't intentional, but I think oftentimes it was, because that's how you got attention. It's why AOC, I think, says things sometimes and people think it's crazy or stupid, but, honestly, she's probably just trying to get your attention. So the purpose, this is a question. And I think, Sean, you just described the whole thing. So the purpose of intention is to get playback. That's not the case. So I'll just read a little bit about what I've written on this before. Context is decisive. So the lens that you provide to people is going to give them their view of it. So, and our intention for how the audience experiences our communication creates their filter for how they perceive us or a situation, all with an eye towards making a decision or taking an action in the direction that we intend. So it's all about shaping how they view the world. That's what the intention part is. It's what do we intend them to be left with from our communication. Our audience, specifically our audience, not necessarily the media, not necessarily our opponents, but our audience that we're specifically focusing on. So building on where we focus our audience's attention, we have the power to intentionally shape how we and they see us and the national political conversation and electoral politics. So some of the questions you might ask yourself is, who do we say we are and how do we want others to see us? And the national political conversation, or whatever's going on in your community, and electoral politics. Like, what is it that you want to have them left with? About a month ago, or 2 months ago, actually, now we did an episode on context, the power of context, and how to use that. We used our context creation exercise, which is an excellent way to actually intentionally going into any kind of communications, whether it's an interview or it's a speech or something like that, to really be clear about who your audience is, how you intend to leave them, the experience you want them to be left with, and then who you're being in the moment to, leave them that way. And so I recommend that, because that helps with this intention, to be intentional about where you want to take them. And then how do we want them left after we focus their attention? That's ultimately what we want from this. So you have to know where you're going to take them. This is a big part of why we have the vision conversation. If you don't know where you want to take them, it's not going to work. I want to mention Rand Paul had an excellent interview for George Stephanopoulos on the Sunday shows, and it was pretty remarkable. So just as an aside to bitch about this, George Stephanopoulos says, so the whole crux of the thing is that Rand Paul says that there's two sides to every issue, and George Stephanopoulos practically is pounding his fist on the desk saying, no, there's only one side. And it just is like, you can see cognitive dissonance is happening for George Stephanopoulos. He just cannot even possibly see that there's another perspective in the situation. It is remarkable. They're talking about the election. But what is obvious is that Rand Paul went into that interview, and he was clear about what he wanted to communicate and how he wanted to communicate and how he was going to be about communicating. And he knew where he was going. So he's at point A. He knows that he wants to be at point B by the end of the interview. And all the different things that are happening, punches are being thrown throughout the interview. He always knew exactly where he was going and how to hold himself. And he never got upset. I'm sure he got upset, but he never really showed it in his demeanor throughout the interview. But he kept coming back to the point that he was making. We'll post it in the comments. It is really excellent. I think it's kind of a masterclass with a reporter that has a very almost debilitating point of view, that he can't even see that there might be another point of view.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. So you might have been reading my notes, and I had them just scribbled here, but all I had was intention, Rand Paul. So because I thought he did such a great job in this interview, and just put a little finer point on it, he really got into the point that you made was the most glaring. It's where the wheels came off for George Stephanopoulos. I think he wasn't supposed to say that. I think but for Rand Paul, he really came in with the intention of, I know I'm going to get asked about, the election and all this other stuff, and I am focused on letting people know that we deserve to know what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And he got who his audience was, and he knew that George Stephanopoulos wasn't going to like that one bit, and he didn't care.
He tried to put him into traps,
Yep.
And he just didn't buy it.
And George laid every typical trap that the reporters play. I'm going to ask you one simple question, and first starting with what I call the prosecutor technique. We're going to get a yes or no out of you. And he paused, and I thought the pause was great, because he was like, wait a minute. I know what I'm here to do, and I'm going to deliver it. And I'm going to make sure that I don't say yes or no or anything to start. Because one of the common things you can fall into is saying, yeah, and, or yeah, but, or no. And because the inclination is to answer the terrible question that you're being asked. Mm-hmm. Don't fall into that, because that's
to accept the context.
Yeah. And that was not
in the context. Two people had an intention in this interview. And unfortunately, you have a reporter having a strong intention, which is, I don't consider that journalism, but that is, par for the course today. So just deal with it.
Yeah. And one thing that I intend to do today is to make it clear that George Stephanopoulos is not a reporter. He is a political hack. Mm-hmm. And God love him for it. But that was probably the only criticism I had of the Rand Paul interview, to say, well, you're a reporter. I was like, he should have said, you work for Clinton Inc. and that's okay. But I'm not going. I'm going to keep delivering the point. But he did such a great job on really laying out that, hey, there are two sides of the story, and we deserve to know what it is. And he even laid out some facts about it. He talked about Wisconsin. He talked about some of the other things, talked about Pennsylvania, talked about state legislatures not doing their job. He gave a very concrete example of Kentucky and the Secretary of State, who the Secretary of State was, actually had laws followed. So when you get into this, I think it's very clear, and he got who he was talking to.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things he got that he really communicated is that the people who are being open about this aren't saying, well, this is what George Stephanopoulos wanted Rand Paul to say. He wanted him to unequivocally say that the election had not been stolen. The problem is anybody who's being open-minded about it, especially those of us who have experience with elections, and we've seen lots of election irregularities through the years, and we specifically personally saw election irregularities this year. We also personally saw election rules get changed in state after state. We've talked a little bit, I think, probably about the Ohio election, where we had people who the night before their election, they didn't realize the next day their election was going to get moved a month and a half, whatever it was. Yeah. And that, just the unconstitutional nature of that a public health official is ultimately the person who decided that, not the state legislature. And ultimately, for the presidential electors, you had either bureaucrats, you had the wrong elected officials deciding these things. So there's so many things. One thing I want to point out, and this is also from this book, which we've mentioned, Win Bigly by Scott Adams, he calls it the high ground maneuver. And I think that that was a masterclass of someone using the high ground maneuver, because what he did, and he really, if you were even at all open to the conversation, or a little bit, at least at all open to hearing both sides, you couldn't leave that interview with a good impression of George Stephanopoulos, who, while he is a hack and is not a journalist, one of the ways that he has been able to do so well, I think, over the last 20 years, and in how he is, how his way of being in his interviews is very reasonable sounding, and very likable, and very like above the fray oftentimes, and much better than the most anchors out there. He is really seems to be above it. While those of us who watch and kind of know a little bit of the background, we get that he's totally putting his thumb on the scale, but he's doing it in such a way that you barely even notice it. In that interview with Rand Paul, you can totally see it, because Rand Paul keeps bringing it back to a high ground position that is really hard to argue against, whether it's transparency, whether it's the constitutionality of the issue, about whether or not this stuff has actually been truly investigated, because mostly everything that, well, not mostly, all of it that was looked at in court cases was dismissed for procedural reasons, and no evidence was ever actually looked at.
Yeah.
So he's saying that we actually need to deal with some of these things. He's also pointing out that laws were broken to do this, and the Constitution wasn't followed. So he's picking the highest positions, and he's also pointing out that there's always two sides to every issue. That is a total high ground position to take, because it's so obvious on its face. Like there's always, and this is one of the main things that we try to communicate here, is that there's always, it's actually more than two sides. There's infinite sides to it. As number of human brains there are in the world, there's that many positions on an issue and perspectives. So it's just such an obvious statement, and to have a journalist say, no, there's only one perspective, he totally fleshed him out. And I've never quite seen George Stephanopoulos quite crap the bed like that. Normally he's much better than that.
It was pretty shocking. I mean, I think you have to really go back decades to see a journalist kind of lose it like that on camera. I think
I don't know. They do it all the time.
Well, but they lose it. They lose it in a way that, I mean, this was completely out of character. Like Don Lemon loses it 3-4 times a week.
Because that's part of his shtick.
Yeah,
I get what you're saying.
I mean, it's to basically be completely out of character was really, I thought, the jarring part for me. Like, it's because it's pretty rare where George is also the most ill-tempered in an interview, and he did that too. So it was pretty shocking.
Yeah, so we got a comment here. Fellow prospective candidates, if you want to get really good at communications with the media and communicating with voters, I highly recommend the Leadership Institute programs, especially the on-camera television workshop, debating training, and campaign communication school. I've attended several courses, and they are wonderful. And those Morton Blackwell is the guy who started that. He's been around for quite some time in conservative circles, and has really been a leader on our side to help empower leaders, just like what we're doing here, really in the mold of reigniting American patriotism. So that is a great suggestion, and thank you for that. And so this is the intention leg of the stool. So if it should be really clear right now. It's like you have an idea where you want to take people, and I put in the comments. I put both the Twitter from Rand Paul's Twitter where he has it. So if you go to Twitter and you're on Twitter, it's a great place to share that. And then I also put the YouTube link if you want to share it in other places. Also, just to watch the intentionality. Is it a perfect interview? No. But this is part of the getting into the ring, is you're going to take punches. Sometimes they're going to land a punch on you, and it's just going to be, hopefully you either have more points at the end, or you've had a technical knockout, or you just totally knocked them out. I think in this case, it was a pretty good match with Senator Paul.
And I think he sunk his battleship.
Yes. Well, yeah, he sunk Georgia's for sure. Pretty good. So moving on to the next area. I'm going to pull this up here. So the one that we're currently on we're on intention. So context is decisive. Does your communication shape your audience's perception and experience? You know where you're taking them, and by your communication, they're more likely to be inclined towards whatever that position is that you're taking them. And then the final leg of the power of A.I.R, which is retention. You can only take action on what you can think to do, and really on what you can remember to do. And this is where I would highly recommend Dr. Carmen Simon's book, Impossible to Ignore, because she really lays out amazing tools. I mean, some of the stuff is really well done. She's the one who points out that sometimes having a typo or something that's a little bit off in a sentence is going to have people stop and actually think about it and look at it, and it's more likely to be memorable. She talks about emotional things are more likely to be remembered. There's just so many things that she talks about that really do impact decisions. And one of the best, I would say, experiments or marketing quandaries that she talks about is this idea that there's folks who want to reduce the number of plastic bags or paper bags that are used by grocery stores. And anybody who happens to have your own canvas bag or one of those reusable grocery bags, exactly what I'm talking about. Is when do you remember your reusable grocery bag? It's usually when you're in the freezer section and you're wondering where you're going to put your stuff. You're like, oh crap, I left it in the back of my car in the trunk. So so you remember it at the wrong time. Now you remember it, and a lot of the advertising campaigns would have people want to do it. They would be interested in it. They were intending to do it, and when they would remember it was not at the moment that they needed to make the decision. So if you're thinking about it from a political perspective, a campaign is you want your communications, everything you're doing, to leave people with a decision and the action at the point that they're going to make the difference, which is when they're voting. So if they're voting by mail, it might be a month before the election. If you have mostly in-person voting, it's going to be on election day. So you're wanting to impact that. If it's a donation, you might be needing them to take action right now. And that's what has to happen. So you have to think about where the action has to happen, or is this going to become an ongoing action that people take? So these are some of the things that you have to be thinking about, and how are they going to remember? And the most powerful example of this I can possibly think of is Johnny Cochran, who is a master communicator, and his in the O.J. Simpson trial, if the glove does not fit, you must acquit. That is like the perfect message. One, it gets your attention. Two, it shapes the intention of it is to shape your thinking towards, well, if A is true, then B is true. So if the glove does not fit, then you must acquit. So it has you move towards that decision. And then it's so memorable, and it also specifically talks about that moment when the jury is going to be together and they're going to be talking about acquittal ultimately, because that's where he's having them focus. It's going to stick with them through that whole time. They will not be able to not think of that throughout that whole thing. Here we are, close to 30 years. I guess we're 25 years, whatever it is, and we all remember it. Johnny Cochran's has passed away now, and we are all still thinking of this. This is a meme that has stuck into our heads since then, and that just shows you he was able to communicate in a way that it actually was there with them at the point of decision, and that is a perfect case of this. Sean, what thoughts do you have on that? And then I'll read what I have written about this.
Yeah, well, that is a great example. It was it really did stick in your mind. I think about infomercials. You know, once you've clicked on them, they do a really great job of keeping your attention, and they have an intention, and you know, call now. You know, lines might be busy. You know, they really, and what we talked about, the persuasion triggers, they hit them all.
Yeah. And their intention ultimately is to have you see yourself using this product.
Exactly. But they do a really great job of it, and you know, it's really, really out there. I think about how do you know, you mentioned it. How do you get to have one retain something at the right time?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think about, like, you know, if you're driving down the highway, the time that McDonald's wants you to know that that they're around is, you know, right before the exit, and you go, oh yeah, I could eat now. Or, you know,
this determines, that's a really good point, because it determines the tactics that you use.
Yes.
When does the decision have to be made? And if it has to be made like some time from now, there's going to be something different that happens. Whereas if it's an impulse that you have to do right then, and that's why an election that's going to happen in 3 months may not be the right place for billboards.
Yeah.
Whereas McDonald's using billboards, it makes perfect sense for them to use billboards.
You know, or, you know, I think about the point of sale at a grocery store. Like, what are the things that people might just grab and buy? You know, I think they tend to be small. They tend to be, you know, gum or stuff like that. Mm-hmm. You know, no grocery store in the world puts gum back in aisle 14, right? They put them right on your way out, because you don't walk by gum on aisle 14 and say, yeah, I could really use that. It's
Mm-hmm.
You're stuck beside it and you're looking and you go, okay, yeah, I could use some gum, and that's when you buy it. So, you know, I think that's you know, another thing to think about, like, because sometimes it needs to be very quick. And other times it's like, okay, I gotta maybe retain this over time, or I really need to, you know, be able to get one's attention several times to do this. And
yeah, so if it's a 30-second TV commercial, most likely it's going to have you retain the information long enough that it's going to be there with you when you're in the store. If it's an infomercial, they have the ability to have you take action right now. That's something they're able to get you to that place to take action right now. So an election, it's going to be, for the voting process, it's going to be a few months from now, a week from now, whatever the distance is to the election. Whereas the donation is likely going to be something that is going to be right now in this communication. We're looking to have you take action and to give. Volunteering, it will be probably something similar. You're going to try to get people to sign up right now to take action. There's a lot of tools, all the different persuasion triggers that we talked about in one of our previous episodes with Robert Cialdini's 6 persuasion triggers. We did that in December. That is, all these are tools that can be used in these. And the reason why we've provided our theory of mass communications that catalyze actions, the power of A.I.R, is that these are 3 areas. You can actually look at these 3 buckets, and you can use all the different tools that we have communicated about, from the story brand to the 6 persuasion triggers to the Cicero episode to incentives and disincentives, all sorts of different tools that we've used, all the different strategic distinctions we have. And you can look at each one of these buckets. If you can look at them, like which one of these is working, which one's not working. If you have all 3 working well, and you might be using different tools in those different buckets, but if all 3 are working well, you have communication that is causing people to make decisions, to impact their perspective on something, or to have them take action, which is ultimately what you're seeking to do. If one of them's out, nothing's wrong. It's just, okay, now maybe my intention bucket needs some work on it, and we're going to work on that. What do we need to do there? Or maybe the attention bucket is needs some work on it. That's the one that's most straightforward oftentimes, and you can go through that. I'm going to read what I have written here, and then there's a question that I think we want to hit in a moment. So retention: you can only take action on what you can think to do or remember to do. Once it is said, it seems obvious, and yet people don't operate like they are aware of this reality. But really, if you can't think of it, this is why fake news is so impactful, is if they have you focusing on one thing all week, a million things have happened in the world, but the media and the cable news make you think like only one thing's happening. So you can't think of anything else. They flood the zone. So whatever you can think of is going to give you your actions. So once we have focused our audience's attention, shaped their perception, and they now see our offerings as relevant, whatever it is that you want to do, our job is to be remembered and on their mind at the moment when our services, our leadership, our, ability to vote for us, our whatever, could make the difference, and they have the intention to take action. So the question I would ask is, what can we do to be remembered as the obvious and relevant solution when they intend to take the action, or when they need to take the action, or make the decision, or what have you? So that is that's the overall thing I would like to communicate. That is the retention bucket. And the question we have here is, can you speak about the misuse of retention? For example, read my lips, no new taxes. Well, that's a really great thing. That is so memorable. It got people's attention. It had people move in the direction that he wanted, apparently, at the time. And it ultimately, I would say, was part of his undoing, that being former President George H.W. Bush.
Right.
So that's the problem, is it was really well done. Persuasion and communication towards an action that got people to take the action, called voting for him and putting him into office. And then he went back on it. So part of what I would say, and then Sean, I'm interested in your thoughts.
Yeah.
What it went to is an inauthenticity. So either he was being inauthentic in that moment, or when he decided to raise taxes, he was being inauthentic. And ultimately, it goes into that whole dynamic that we talked about earlier, trying to look good or avoiding looking bad. And at some point, when either in that decision to talk about it in that convention speech and saying, read my lips, no new taxes, either that was trying to look good. Actually, probably is both cases. That was trying to look good there. And then later on, when he worked with the Democrats to raise taxes, was probably trying to look good with a different crowd. And this is something a lot of politicians are going to get in trouble with, is they're going to try to look good with lots of different audiences, and it's going to be contradictory, and that's going to be their undoing. But because of such powerful communication, it stuck with people. And then when he went back on it, he caused himself problems. Now, with that said, you can go back on something that you thought was the right action at one point. You're just going to have to work to restore your word in that moment. You said it was one way, and now, whatever the facts have changed, what have you, you have to acknowledge the lack of integrity that's there. It's not a good or bad thing. It's not like you're immoral or anything like that. It's just that you have to acknowledge that you said that thing and now you're doing something different. The best example I remember I've seen actually in politics is Donald Trump in 2017. After he had been president for 6 months, he looked at the whole Afghanistan situation, and he actually came out and he said, I know I said I was going to reduce troop numbers immediately, and I've looked at the situation, I've talked to the generals, and just in judging everything that's going on, that at this point it doesn't make sense to do that, and our intention is to withdraw troops at some point, but now is not the time. And that had great integrity. And I know people are being like, oh, you can't talk about integrity with Donald Trump. Well, yes, you can. Actually, I think he had a lot more than most politicians because he's more likely to have done what he said he's going to do. And in that case where he didn't do what he said he was going to do, he actually cleaned it up with people and explained it. So that's my thought. And I think George H.W. Bush probably wanted to have it both ways. And that's it's been long enough ago that it's a little bit fuzzy for folks, though. Go ahead, Sean. What are your thoughts?
So 2 things. I want to, if you think back to the speech, so what everybody retained was read my lips, no new taxes. But
that was the most important thing. That was what got that, and maybe 1,000 points of light. I can't remember if that was that speech or if it was. I think that was that one. Gentler United States. Those are like the 3 things that people are left with.
But prior to saying read my lips, no new taxes, George H.W. Bush actually laid out exactly how this was going to go in Congress. And what people don't remember is that in 1988, Republicans had not had control of the House for 30 plus years. Mm-hmm. So the only reality people knew was Republican presidents having to work with Democrat houses. That's just the way it worked. And so he laid out very specifically, they're going to come at me with taxes, and I'm going to say no. And they're going to come back at me with taxes and make it better, and I'm going to say no. And they're going to come again, and then I'm going to say, read my lips, no new taxes. The place went nuts, right? Mm-hmm. Well, the thing about retention is that if it's done well, I'd actually say that this was one of the best examples of it, and not a misuse. So just because now the troublesome part was his opponents also remembered this. Mm-hmm. And I think some of them that's the moment that they were going to lose. That, okay, because this is a different guy than we've ever run against in George H.W. Bush. Because prior to that, he wasn't taking the fight to Dukakis and the Democrats. But here is when he decided he was going to. And so I think they decided in that moment, if we do nothing else in these 4 years, we are going to have him raise taxes. And I think that became like the plan. That was the legislative fallback. Because I think they got one other thing about George H.W. Bush. It was that he wasn't going to come out and say, hey, things changed.
Yeah.
And do it. And not because anything's wrong or anything. It just wasn't going to be what happened.
Yeah, he had to save face.
Yeah. So
it was obvious where the chink was. It was also obvious for anybody probably who was paying attention. He's also the guy who said, voodoo economics about Reagan and his tax policies. So I think it was pretty clear to people that the read my lips, no new taxes was a bit of BS from him. And it was a place that you could actually press on. And I call that a trim tab, is that you could actually press on that and get the greatest leverage. And Democrats did that. They came back to him, and then he caved.
Yeah. I mean,
it just completely took the ground out from under him, which is not super duper surprising. This is a comment we got. Great show, guys. who manages the timetables and making certain your attention, intention, retention are honed correctly to run a successful campaign? Do you do that? Well, in a campaign situation, we definitely do that. And it's also going to be trial and error, because it's going to be kind of like any machine. If you think about it from a machine perspective, you have the system, you're thinking about how do we get attention, where are we trying to take people, how are we trying to shape their point of view, and then how do we have it stick with people? And you're going to constantly be tuning that. Actually, the whole campaign needs to be attuned to that. Now, one of the questions that is inherent to this, especially if you're down ballot, if you're running for president, you have the ability to get pretty much all the earned media that you would ever need. So earned media being all the press. If you're running for state house, well, that's not necessarily going to be the case. And when it comes to retention and it comes to attention, even the intention, because you probably want to do a survey to kind of get how to communicate with people, these are all going to take money. And that's going to be from fundraising to the political operation, to the communication shop, to the strategist who's working with all the folks who are doing the media and messaging and the polling. It's going to be the whole campaign that's going to be involved in this. And the biggest place that people are going to run into trouble is a lack of resources, a lack of, whether it's connections to the media, whether it's lack of money to be able to spend the advertising. In this day and age, if you're conservative, it's the inability to get reach on social media. So there's going to be things that you're going to run up against that will be friction when it comes to getting attention, and in particular the retention, because repetition is a big part of retention.
Well, there's a reason there's a reason that state legislative races and congressional races, in particular House races, tend to run however the top of the ticket's running. Presidential races or whatever tend to have some sort of correlation. It's because it is very difficult for legislative offices, non-executive offices, to get that attention from the traditional media. So, and we've seen it, like governors, mayors, presidents, they tend to get the attention. U.S. senators, that's about it. And then everybody else is fighting for what the rest of that can look like. So that is something to be mindful of. And just because they have a tendency to cover it doesn't mean that they will. So,
and it depends on who's covering it. There's a lot of maybe local papers, or there's a lot of sort of journalists that do cover things, but is anybody actually watching it?
Yeah.
Does anybody actually care? The truth is, a lot of people around the country, they are only watching cable news at this point. They're not watching their local news. Some places are going to be watching their local news religiously, and they're going to be impacted by that. So it really depends as to how people get their information. That's why one of the questions we had John Rogers on, we had Lee Vacher on pollsters that we work with. The information flow question is a really important one, where people are getting their information. That will be helpful in knowing where to get people's attention. I think Donald Trump was pretty keen. The world's changed since he ran, of course, because they clamped down on social media. He got that a lot of people were being impacted by what they saw on social media. And if he could be interesting there, that he was going to have a real impact. So these are all questions these are all areas that you want to be thinking about in your communication. Please leave, any questions you have, any comments you have about these topics. This is something that's unique to us. If you are interested in working with Olson Strategies, you can go to olsonstrategies.com. You can communicate with myself or Sean about your campaign, whether you're running for office yourself or you are looking to have an organization that is going to impact the conversation out there. We can help you with that and use a lot of our tools to do that. Because here's the thing: there's a million things that go into all of this, in which we can completely go through all that, because it would take too much time. But we've been through this so much that we can actually hone something specifically for your situation in the middle of some communications battle. So go to olsonstrategies.com, and we'd be happy to work with you on that. And then additionally, really, we don't know from day to day. As you know, Periscope's being shut down in 2 months. Parler is currently still not back up. So, whether it's a business isn't going to be in existence, or they get shut down by their competitors, or we were disappeared on Facebook for 1 day last week, or YouTube's been changing their settings, and so it has an effect. We all want to be able to assemble here and be able to empower each other and support each other in helping to reignite American patriotism. So please go to politicaltradesecrets.com, sign up to be a Political Trade Secrets Insider, get exclusive stuff from us. Then we'll all be able to communicate with each other as well, no matter what. And that's going to be really important. Sean, would you like to let people know about our other 2 sponsors?
Absolutely. Look, you have one opportunity to really connect with voters where they are. Grassfire does that better than anybody. They really use these attention, intention, and retention to deliver for you on the doorstep, in front of the grocery store, or over the phone. Canvassing, petitioning, live calling. It's www.grassfire.us. They also fuel 10centtexting.com. 10-cent texting literally wrote the book on political texting. So work with the experts who can really connect your message with the voters who need to hear from you most, the constituents who need to hear from you most, and go to 10centtexting.com.
All right. Well, thank you, Sean. Thank you for a great episode. And thank you for everybody who joined us today. We are really grateful to have all of you here participating in this conversation and seeking to be political leaders in your community, for your state, and for our country. And again, go and sign up at politicaltradesecrets.com. It's really been great to have you here with us today. We're going to be back tomorrow around 11 a.m. And please do join us. And with that, this has been another episode of Political Trade Secrets.
Join us next time by subscribing on iTunes and get show notes and sign up for our newsletter at politicaltradesecrets.com.